Welcome to Leading the Conversation, a monthly conversation that we have with community leaders so that we can understand our community better and be better neighbors to one another, to be the kind of neighbors that Jesus has called us to be. My guests for this conversation are Brian Cole, a teacher in our Moorhead schools, and we have Larry Knutson, who is the voice of Moorhead sports. And so we're going to have a conversation about some of the important things that go on in our community: education, music, sports, and see what we can learn together as we have this conversation. So thank you both for being here.
It is my pleasure, for sure.
Wonderful. So first of all, I like to get to know each of you better. And Larry, you're a member here at Good Shepherd, so I know you a little bit better. But I'd like to understand, how did you get into being the voice of Moorhead sports?
It's a story, and it can be a long one. I'll keep it as short as I can. As a sportscaster, we often hear about people who think and dream to become a sportscaster. They want to be at a game and do that kind of thing. I grew up dreaming to listen, just to listen to sports. I got into a lot of trouble at home on the farm because I would listen to a baseball game rather than go out in the field and do the plowing. Well, once it happened. And so with that in mind, I was soon on my way through college and still had no ideas of what to do. And I was at home in Ashby, and I was painting. I was getting started on my painting career as well. And I was kneeling on the ground by the side of the building that we were working on. And it turned out later what an ideal situation that was. And I asked God for help. Asked God for help to see what might be next in store for me. And it was just a bolt of lightning for the most part that said, take a microphone, go up to the gym, pretend like you're doing a game on the air. And I did that. Had no idea what I was doing. The next thing I know, I'm interviewing at Fergus Falls Radio. Next thing I'm in East Grand Forks. Next thing I'm in Minnesota Morris. Next thing I know, I'm in Moorhead. And here we are.
And you are still painting.
And still painting and still calling games.
Wonderful. How did you get to be a teacher?
Well, I know Larry's an Ashby Arrow. I was a Marshall Tiger. I grew up in the southwest part of Minnesota, and our colors are orange and black. So, you know, when I took the job in Moorhead, my mom said, is it because of the school colors? And not entirely. But, you know, I left Colorado, where I did my graduate degree, and applied for a few jobs in Minnesota. For 1 year, I taught up in Thief River. And when I was up in Thief River Falls, someone from Moorhead said, hey, there's an opening in the Moorhead schools. That's about 27 years ago now. And came down and interviewed, and I didn't think it would be that I end up here and stay here forever. But, you know, this is home, and that's how I ended up teaching here in Moorhead.
And what drew you into music? Was that your part of your growing up?
You know, my dad's a teacher, and my mom probably should have been a teacher. So we grew up in a, you know, education was really important to our home in Marshall. My dad was a business teacher in the high school, and my mom was very involved with school activities. And I think in the back of my mind, I always knew that I was going to end up in education. When I was in third grade is when I started an orchestra, and hard to believe, Larry, but I used to be a cool kind of a person. And in third grade, I was sitting in the back of music class, and the fourth grade orchestra down at elementary school in Marshall came to play. And I'm embarrassed to say this now, but me and my friends, we sat in the back, and we kind of made fun of the small orchestra. And I had zero intentions of signing up for orchestra. But before you left, you had to walk up to the front of the room and try out all the instruments. And so we all filed by, and this young lady, her name is Jean Cheney, and I don't know where she ended up, but I owe her a thank you. I tried out the violin or viola, I don't remember what it was, and I knew her from other activities. And she said, you know, Brian, you'd be really good at this. And I went home that night, and I told my dad, I said, I think I want to sign up for orchestra. And he was shocked. He's like, orchestra? Yeah. But I know if that fourth grade girl hadn't said, Brian, you'd be really good at this, I never would have signed up for orchestra, and I never would have ended up, I think I would have been a teacher, history teacher, or English teacher or something. But I'm so thankful that that girl felt a nudge to tell me that, and that's how I ended up being a music teacher. So.
Wow, that's fantastic. So both of you have been to a few different places, lived in a few different places in your life, but you've also really set deep roots here in Moorhead. So what is Is there something, what's something wonderful that comes from really digging deep and putting roots somewhere?
I often tell people about the city of Moorhead and Fargo too, that the reason Moorhead specifically succeeds as a small community is because it is just that. It's a big town, but it's made up of small town people. And small town people take care of themselves.
And one another.
And each other, yes.
Yeah. It's kind of not too small and not too big, it's just right.
It reminds, in a lot of ways, because of the people that we meet, it reminds me of growing up in Ashby.
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah, I feel the same way. I don't know when I read this article several years ago, but you know, the line most people say is, you know, home is where your heart is. But I think this statement a lot in Moorhead, home is where your story is. And I think so many of us came here, whether we knew we were going to stay here a long time or not, but you end up planting your roots and, you know, your story is here. And I think there's so many people that moved to Moorhead that came from the Ashbys or the Marshalls or the Fergus Falls, and they bring those small town memories and they try to replicate them here. And I think that's what makes it a special place.
And I am a Moorhead Spud. I graduated from Moorhead High School. And so I would love to talk a little bit about Spud history, since both of you are interested in understanding the past and what makes our community strong and good. So what are some things in Spud history that we should be aware of as a community?
I guess because as a sportscaster, I grew up reading the newspapers about different stories and different teams that were doing well, and Moorhead was virtually on the front page of a lot of sports stories. And you read about their chances of going to state, and you read about their chances of things that didn't work out quite so well, and yet they persevered and were right back battling in again the next year. And things, as time has gone by, we learned too about the way that the basketball teams have been so competitive year in and year out, and that the hockey team, virtually out of the cradle, made themselves into a major force in Minnesota hockey. And it's that intestinal fortitude that comes with living in the upper Midwest, I believe, that has helped that along.
Okay.
Yeah, you know, the Moorhead Schools has been around since 1873. And, you know, we're coming up on 150 years of public education for our community.
Okay.
And, yeah, I agree, Larry. I mean, you look at the sports, you look at the art scenes, the music, musical theater, of course, has quite a reputation in this community. But when I think football, when I think hockey, theater, you trace it back, and it always started with one idea or one person or one group of people who said, you know what, we need hockey at the high school, or we need a band at the high school, or we need a school in our town. And the last few years, as I've been thinking and you know, studying Spud history, I'm so thankful that there were people in our past who said, you know what, this is needed in our town. And I'm not going to get it to Z, but I'm going to take it from A to B or A to C. And there always seems to be that next man up mentality that exists in sports, but it also exists here in our public school system, is that, you know, Mr. Reinertson was a superintendent from the 20s to the late 50s. Well, then Mr. Swenson came, and then it was Larry Nyblad, and there's Lynn Kovash, and now it's Dr. Lunick, that there's always someone to carry on that tradition, whether it's in the sports, the academics, the leadership, and I don't know. I think a good school system is like a church, a business, that we don't own it. We inherit it for a while. It's like a family heirloom, I guess.
Yeah.
You inherit it, and you try to make it better. You preserve it. And at some point, you know that, you know, I'm going to pass this on to the next person that follows me as an orchestra teacher or a sports announcer. And then they're going to carry it forward to the next generation. And I think there's something special. I mean, there's excellence really in every part of the Moorhead school system. And I'm biased. Larry, are you biased?
Well, certainly.
Yeah. You're biased. You're a Spud. But I mean, you see that excellence all over, and you can't exaggerate it. You can't make it up. There's pride in that commitment to doing your best.
I think you struck on something that we talked about a little bit earlier, and that you have that pride in your community, like what we grew up with. We had pride in the community that we grew up with. We want to carry that through and make sure that other people then from now on have that pride and have that instilled in them as a way to do things.
Well, and I'm sure it was like this in Ashby and Marshall and Friday nights.
Football.
Everybody went to the stadium. Everyone went to the football field at Legion Field in Marshall. And that tradition, you see that when you get 4,000 or 5,000 people at Jim Go to Stadium,
Yep.
that's something that carries on. And I hope it carries on for a long time.
I know. Every time I go to a football game, I see half the church there. So, I mean, I don't even actually get to watch any of the game because I'm just visiting with all the people that I know from church. But because it's the place to be.
Yeah.
But my next question is, tell me some specific programs, activities that we should be proud of in Moorhead, but you listed a whole bunch of them. I mean, we really do have a well-rounded offering when we have our sports that are so strong, but also music and musical theater. We've got a lot and the art scene, we've got a lot going on. So I'm wondering if each of you would pick out a few specific programs you're really proud of, or something that would be important for our greater community to know about.
Well, I'll start. I think this week is Girls in Sports Week. And, for a long time, if you were a female and wanted to compete in sports, you stayed after school, and it was like I think they called it the GAA, Girls Athletic Association.
Yep.
Yep.
There were no games, no competitive tournaments, and that started to change in the late 60s. And there's a lady in our community, Paula Bach, who was the one who said, girls, not just in Moorhead, but Minnesota, are going to be a part of the high school league. And she was met with a lot of resistance. And how she started the program here in Moorhead became the model for every other school in Minnesota. In fact, when the high school league started their Hall of Fame, Paula Bach was in the inaugural class of being inducted. And so I think, girls sports for a long time. Girls track early in the 70s and 80s, state champions. Volleyball, been to state tournament many times. Girls basketball had a late run in the late 90s, early 2000s. Cross country, you look at all of the female sports, all the girls sports, and it can be traced back to the motivation and the encouragement of Paula Bach. So I think of girls athletics as a whole, Larry. I don't know.
Well, I would agree. I don't know if we can do much better in answering that question than what Brian just did, in that we can't isolate one particular person so much, because everyone that has ever stepped up to the plate has delivered a hit.
Yeah.
And it has been good from the very beginning until now. And I still think we have to go back to the leadership that the superintendents have provided, because by and large, the buck stops there. And if it's not going to work, it's because they said, no, we can't do that. I don't ever hear that about the superintendents. I'm sure they had their moments where they had to say, you know what, it doesn't seem like the right thing to do.
Yeah.
And then you go about, maybe revise it, put it back on the table, and away we go.
So it seems like there's been a culture of maybe permission granting, and not the culture of, no, we've never tried that, we won't do it.
I don't know. I
Maybe
don't
the
know
culture
about
of
that.
why not? Let's
what
give
if?
it a
How
try.
about? Right.
Yeah.
And just look at those possibilities that have come from it. But what about music specifically? I think you've had a great role in making our music program so strong, and like the all-city concerts, those are fantastic.
I think early on, and this goes way before my time, is that it wasn't music for a few, it was music for all. And the work of Buzzley and Newton and Polachicchio and others who said, you know what, if you can ride a bike, you can learn to play a stringed instrument. And we don't, at least in the orchestra program, we never say orchestra is the most important part of your day. We say we want orchestra to be a part of your day. And we love that our students are involved in the arts. We love that they're good in the classroom. We love that they have to leave school because their hockey team is driving up to Roseau. We love that they're involved in many facets. And I think that's perhaps encouraged the numbers in orchestra and band and choir to grow. Speaking of the arts, you have to talk about the musical theater in the town. Rebecca Meyer Larson, I believe, is in her 30th year, and her productions are always, amazing. The speech team, they've won 3 back-to-back state championships. That's the only program in Moorhead that's won 3 state championships in a row, and going up against some pretty formidable opponents down in the metro area. So, and those are programs, whether it's athletics, the arts, speech and theater, what are the life lessons that you get? And, with speech and theater and music, there's a long list of lessons that these kids are learning to help them as they go to college and then into their careers.
Well, and Rebecca Meyer-Larson was my speech coach when I was in high school, and I think that having that opportunity to be in speech, it has helped shape what I have been doing with my life. I stand and talk to a lot of people. Right now I stand in a lot of empty rooms and talk to camera lenses, but I know I'll get back to a point where we can gather as a community safely, and I just think that part of that has been shaped through the programs that I was in at Moorhead High School as well.
And to think that at one point, the people that not involved with their children in school said education is a waste of time. I mean, there was a time when that was the general thought. And of course, that was when the country itself was growing and there was a lot of work at home that needed to be done. And that was more important than sending your kid off to school. Well, as times have changed, that attitude has changed.
Yeah, yeah. Well, another big thing that we can't not talk about is the pandemic and COVID and how that has impacted our students, our programs, our sports, all of the extracurricular activities. I don't know if you could share how you think that's impacted.
I'm going to let you go on this because this certainly has a bigger impact on your daily life than it does mine.
Yeah, I mean, and I thought if someone would tell me that it was going to be a year, which we're coming up on a year, I would have hoped that I could say by the end of the year, I'd be feeling better about it. I think these last 3 or 4 weeks as a teacher and as a person and a husband and dad, I think it's gotten harder personally because I think all of us were looking forward to it being a quick fix, and we're now realizing it's a marathon. It might be an ultra marathon.
Yeah.
Maybe last May, one of my mentors and friends, Kirk Militzer, who was a pastor for many years at Triumph, we were talking, and he said this. He said, Brian, if you're the same husband, dad, teacher, coach after COVID that you were before, he said, then this has all been a waste. And he challenged me and others, how has COVID encouraged growth even in this tough time? And I think that's one of the life lessons to take from this. It's not very often we get, I hope we never have to go through this again.
Yeah.
But we are in it. And Larry, I know you're into history. These moments like these don't come to our world very often. Once a century, maybe. Yeah. And so to look at that as an opportunity, so we're in the middle of it, how are we going to grow from it? And what are the lessons that we are going to take forward from this moving forward? It seems odd, right, to look in a basketball gym and seeing 20 spectators, or to look out in a church and see no one in the pews.
Yep.
I don't think, I'll never take those moments for granted, when we get the chance to be with other people. And I don't think I answered your question right, other than for me personally, it's a daily, you pray for physical health, but lately I've been thinking mental health. And I think for the kids, here's a story 2 days ago, I won't mention the kid's name, but she was playing really well in class. And I looked at her, and she couldn't see under my mask, but I was smiling at her. And I probably should have given her a thumbs up. And afterwards, she came up to me and she said, Mr. Cole, what was I doing wrong? And I said, oh, Koshan, you were playing so well. And she said, I thought you were just staring at me because I was doing something wrong. And the mask, you can't communicate with kids with, it's tough with your eyes. You want those facial expressions. And so, so those are every day, every hour, it's a struggle to see where the kids are because you can't see their face.
And that's just a big challenge, even though, I wear my mask, except I took it off when we started recording. But, I'm supportive of wearing the mask and keeping our numbers down, but also at the same time acknowledging that it's not ideal, that it's hard. There's just, when most of your face is covered up, you can't express yourself the way that you'd want to.
Yeah, that's right.
And I find I have to verbally say what's under my mask. Like you said, you should have done a thumbs up.
Yeah.
Sometimes I have to tell people, like Larry, oh, that was a good joke. No, really, I'm smiling under my mask.
Actually, we rarely smile at his jokes. But
Or I try to be extra expressive with my eyes, and I think that's why I have so many extra crow's feet around my eyes after this year. Because I'm like, don't you see, I'm trying to express myself, but you can't see most of my face.
Yeah.
That's just been something that's hard. And then you also just brought up the impact is that it's so long. And I think with the new year, we wanted it we wanted to see some more change in once we got to 2021. It's like, okay, let's just get rid of 2020, but yet getting into 2021 and knowing there's still all these things that have to happen before life can go back to, or even move forward to the new normal, knowing that there will be things that don't go back to the way they were. But what would you like to add about just the impact of COVID?
One thing is that when it first came out, you struck on something about we wanted it to be over. Well, that's the way we've been growing up. The millennials think that everything is going to happen right now because we want it to. It doesn't work that way. Time has a way of taking care of things in its own way. And people were a little upset because there were some rules that had to be followed. And you can't tell me that I can't do this and can't do that. Well, you know what? It's not anybody that's doing that.
Yeah.
This is a very serious situation, and it's got to get taken care of in its own way. And in my own way, early on, at the very beginning of this, starting to understand what was going on, I had a feeling that we're going to find out what we're made of throughout this. And slowly but surely, I've seen a better attitude towards the rules that are in place than what we did at the very beginning, because it's gone long enough where people understand, you know what, this isn't going to just go away.
Yeah.
We got to do something in the right way about it. So.
Yeah. Well, and part of the gift, which is also hard, but the gift of COVID, that we're all experiencing it together. It's not just one person that is experiencing their own difficult time, but we're all in it together, which means we can all support one another. We can all help each other. We all know that it's hard for each other. The isolation is hard. The staring at screens is hard. The not being able to just gather in the ways that we used to is hard. So part of the gift is just knowing that we're in this together. So my hope is that that continues to bring out the best in us, that we would have care and concern for one another, check on those people we haven't heard from or seen, and inquire into each other's lives, because we're all shouldering this, and no one's exempt from it.
I was reading an article, and this has helped me actually a lot the last few weeks. Sorry, Larry, this is a music analogy, so it's going to be hard.
I'll work on it.
Okay.
I'll figure it out.
But you know, they talked about in a symphony, in a full orchestra, there are times where you're not playing, where you have rest in front of you. And that doesn't mean the music has stopped. That just means that, okay, for this many measures, you're noticing what's going on. You look up at the conductor or the guy upstairs and you say, okay, they're leading me. They're going to let me know when it's time to come back in. And so all of us are in this long period of rest.
Yes.
We know the music's going to start again. We know that other people are able to do things that we wish we could do, but in our part right now, we're resting. And that's helped me a lot, saying that there's somebody who knows when the timing's going to be perfect for me to hit my stride again. But for right now, we're supposed to pause, you know.
That's a great analogy, and I am going to steal that for a sermon.
Go for it, yeah. Right.
You'll have to listen for that, Larry.
Do I? Okay.
Okay, so what are some of the things that you have been learning, that each of you have been learning, that you hope we bring forward into the new normal, whatever it is?
Well, a general thought about that line, and it has been in place long before this pandemic came about. But as a general way of growing up, I once saw a band, a wristband. And being in radio, everything I saw that was letters, I thought had to be a radio station. And the call letters of this radio station was WWJD. And when somebody told me what that actually stood for, what would Jesus do? It just changed the way things are done. And you stop to think, instead of complaining about things or about people that might be in trouble, you stop to think, okay, now what would Jesus do? He placed me here. It's now up to me. So what would you do? And let me follow that path.
Yeah, I think that's something beautiful. And what we know is Jesus was always looking out for the least of these.
Certainly.
Jesus was looking out for the people who have been overlooked. And I think that's been a huge challenge during COVID, because people who are healthy and financially stable have been mostly okay. But if you're not healthy or you don't have a stable foundation, those are the folks that have been falling through the cracks.
Yeah, and it's hard to understand why.
Yeah,
Why
that's
there
right.
is the difference.
Yeah.
Well, and it's just then those things that have been hard have been made harder because we don't have our normal ways of communicating or gathering.
Yep.
And I think that's something we see in the church, is that some of our members are doing just fine and are maybe just stir crazy, but otherwise they're healthy and well. And other people have just been struggling to make ends meet if, you know, their work has been cut back or their side job has been dropped or whatever it is that has made life even harder. And so at church, I mean, we kind of see both sides of this. And I think that's how you said churches and schools can be similar. In the school district too, you've got the people who are doing pretty good and they're pretty secure. And then you also have folks that were already struggling, and it's even harder to make those connections.
Yes.
So one of my hopes is that in church and in school and in all the other parts of our life that we can be working on, why are we not reaching certain people? Why are we not making a connection, and be thinking and working to try to strengthen that during COVID, so that once we get past this, we've got some better plans in place for staying connected in the future. That's one of my hopes. How has this impacted you as a teacher?
Well, you know, it used to be that our, cycle was, we gave 4 concerts, we marched in the homecoming parade, we played at nursing homes at Christmas, we did the national anthem at the Twins game, and all of those things for over a year now, we have not given one public performance. And it's probably not the best analogy, but as a teacher, I've spent 27 years trying to build something here in our schools and community. It seems like so much of this just no longer exists anymore. And we know that there's going to take time to have to build it up again to what it was. And there's a sense of loss when you realize what our numbers used to be. There's a loss in the number of concerts we used to be able to get, and the music that we could minister to others with. And so it's my hope that all of those things come back, but ultimately it comes down to the kid, right? More than anything, it comes down to the kid that's in our class every hour. And yeah, you're right. We aren't able to give concerts, and we're not able to go and play at nursing homes, but we still have the privilege every hour to have a group of 20 kids come into our classroom who need a little ministry, right? Who need a little love in an appropriate school setting. And so I think every teacher in our district, well, every teacher in the country right now, I think I hope they've had a chance to say internally, you know what? Content takes a backseat to the kid, and to help that kid along, right? If the only thing the kid gets is that they feel a sense of peace for the moments that they're with me, mission accomplished, And so I hope this has softened me up as a teacher going forward, to realize that I think of all the time and energy, perhaps stress, that I used to spend getting ready for these events that we would produce and promote and celebrate. There's a place for that, and we miss them, but at the same time, I think I've learned that I can put my energy into things that are going to last longer.
Yeah.
And so, I don't know if that answers your question. But.
Yeah. And I wonder for you, you're still calling games, but it's not to the packed houses, the packed stadiums that it used to be.
And it's different to be in the gymnasium when parents, basically, they're allowed like in Minnesota, 2 tickets, and every school has their right to do whatever they want inside of that, but 2 tickets per student that's at the game. So if you have 2 teams, do the math. And it is difficult. You almost feel like, why bother? And you can't let that be that way, because there are, for every one of those people that are in the gym, how many more are outside of the gym at home waiting to see how their nephew, niece, grandchildren are doing, and how is this game being played? Well, that's up to me to tell them.
Yeah.
And so it's there to do, and I've got to just get past the idea that this is an empty place right now, but it's not,
Right.
And I wonder if there's more people who are listening to you on the radio because they're not at the game.
Correct. I'd like to think that's the case.
And so what you have been doing, the service you continue to provide, is allowing way more people to listen to it because they're not there in person.
And that's been the motivation from day one, whether or not it's a full gym or not, is that I know that there are people at home that can't be there, and they want to know what's going on, because that's the way I grew up. I was passionate about listening to see how a certain team was doing.
Yep.
And I wanted to know, and I'd listen to games, and I'd listen to games, and I'd listen to games.
Yep.
And now it's my chance to give it back.
Well, and I think that the people who have been listening to you regularly, and maybe the added people who have even been listening to you regularly, you are a familiar voice. And so I think that's part of the power of what you do. Yes, you're calling the plays and you're letting people know what happens, but just your presence, you have this confidence, this calmness about you that I think it can help people if they're feeling bad about not being in the same room. I think what you are providing is such a strength to this community.
It's terribly humbling to think that it might be conceived that way, perceived that way.
Because, I mean, you're doing the thing that you've been doing, and I think to have some normalcy, people also need that too. Like, okay, we got Larry here on the radio, and that's something that's normal. And maybe Larry's not normal, but
I was waiting for that.
but your voice is a reassuring voice that they've come to know and trust. I'm wondering if so you didn't get to do these big things that you'd had set out in your regular calendar. Is there some freedom, though, of like, okay, well, we didn't get to do any of this stuff. What about any of those events wasn't working that maybe we change how we do some of it in the future? And having this year-long pause has maybe given you an opportunity to say, okay, let's just get rid of that one thing then, and we're going to do this differently next time.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, in the spring, when everything was done or not happening, I think a lot of us were, I know Larry got together with some people at Spuds TV, and they did like a memory lane of what the 87 football team or a volleyball, to kind of reflect on some past things. Larry and I, we worked on that video. I can't remember what it was called. It's just Quiet Day to Be a Spud.
Yep.
And, I think that's one thing that a lot of us felt is that we're going through this. We better make sure we document what it was like, because there will be a time when we all get to go back to normal. But for me and my family and our community, I want us to remember those days, weeks, months where we desperately wanted to do something and we couldn't. And so, I love the way that Larry gave those lines. It's a quiet day to be a spud.
Yep.
At some point we'll be back, but for now, it's a quiet day. And so I don't know, that there were some things that we did last spring and this summer that kind of filled that creative void in my life that wouldn't have happened if there hadn't been COVID. So.
Yeah, and we'll play that video at the end, and I don't want to stop and play it right now because I always tear up every time I see that video. But there is something about acknowledging the moment, acknowledging the hardness of it, to sit in that, but then also to be reminded this isn't forever. We will get back to celebrating and gathering and doing the things that make us strong as a community.
One thing we can't forget is that this 100 years ago was a worse situation. Mathematically and racial-wise, it was a worse situation. And yet 100 years later, we don't know anything about it. Yeah. Basically, somebody wrote it down, and that's about all we know of it. Yeah, apparently, it changed the world at that time, but we got past it, and we lived on. And
yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
Doing it again.
That's why it is important to understand our history. So I'm wondering, maybe to wrap this up, what is giving each of you joy right now?
Mr. Cole.
Larry Knutson.
Okay, no, that was easy, because you both are amazing.
You want to rewrite that, and we'll edit it in.
Yeah. We'll edit it out totally. Okay. One thing that brings you joy, or I'll even give you a different angle, one thing you're really passionate about right now.
I have one thing that comes to mind, and there are two parts to it. One is that there is the story, and we will hear, well, we won't hear a lot of it because it's not publicly made known. It's not like they're touting themselves or the situation. But there was a story a couple of years ago, several years ago, as Moorhead football would meet with parents. The dads would come into the locker room and be a part of it with their sons, as the coaches would give their talks. And I am not afraid to mention that Mr. Feeney was the big part of this, if not the part of it. And after he was done giving his talk and his speech, one of the dads came up to him a day later and said, "You know what? You saved my life with my son." And I can't think of that, like you said earlier, about maybe getting just a little bit emotional about that, is that one act had brought two people back together that we expect to be together, a father and son. And they were made whole again, those two, because of what happened on that football field and in that locker room as they shared the moments together. And the other one, it's a little bit lighter in tone, is one of the highlights of what I've done was doing the play-by-play of a junior high concert.
Yeah.
Conducted by Mr. Cole. He said he's got this bucket list.
Okay.
And he said one of them is to have my concert be done as a play-by-play announcer would have it. So he wrote out this nice little script, and as every part of the orchestra would contribute their part, there was a narration for it, like a play-by-play. And now the violas come in to do this, and this, and the violins, and we go on, and he says, I'll give you a little sign when it's time to do the next one. And we got through it, and he got a standing ovation.
No, Larry, you misunderstood. That was for you, Larry.
No.
That's amazing.
Yeah, that was great. It was great.
I think Libby was, she was
Libby
a sixth
was
grader.
there, yeah.
Right.
That is fantastic.
Career highlight for me. I love sharing a stage with Larry. Yeah, it was great.
But I mean, also, there's so many ways that we can come together in our different areas. A lot of times we keep these avenues really separate, sports or music, but yet there's a lot of things that we could do to overlap and have some interplay.
Certainly, yeah.
Oh, absolutely,
And
yeah.
build up connection among the different students and activities. And I think you having the students wear sports jerseys, I mean, that's just one way to show they're on a different team, but we've got all these teams.
Right.
And we promote excellence in all of the activities.
We're all in this together.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
But what's something that's bringing you hope or something you're passionate about?
Well, I'm just so glad we're back in school. I mean, to see kids get off the bus, to hear noise in the hallways, to hear that there might be some lunch kerfuffle going on in the lunchroom, that tells me that we're coming back. But I think, personally for me right now, I'm a lot less busy. There's nothing to do after 5 o'clock at night. And it's been really refreshing to be at home and to, spend time with my wife and kids and our new dog. And so a lot of joy at home right now, which I'm thankful for and blessed with. And but I'm ready for some normalcy to come back, some events to go to. And but it's amazing. I think that Moorhead has still stayed so tight during this time. And
Yeah.
but I liked what you said, Mary, before. We're all going through this. This is a shared experience. And I think it helps a little bit when we know that our neighbors are going through what we're going through as well.
Yeah. Well, I want to thank you both for having a conversation with me. I know we could follow a whole bunch of rabbits into all sorts of rabbit holes, but this was a wonderful opportunity to just get a snapshot to get to know both of you better. And for all of you who are out there watching and listening, I'm really thankful for this opportunity to celebrate some of the wonderful things that happen in our community in the midst of hard times. And one of the things that each of you lifted up is you celebrated people who are making positive contributions in our community, and that they do make a difference, and those interactions between individuals can impact someone's whole life. And so my hope for all of us as we're listening to this and as we leave this conversation is that we can all celebrate one another. We can all offer a word of hope, encouragement to one another. Who knows? You could raise up a teacher or a sportscaster. You could help somebody on a good path in life by your words of encouragement. So that's my hope for us today as we continue to try to be the kinds of neighbors that Jesus has called us to be. Join us next month for Leading the Conversation.